other disciplines funded by other research councils, and there's an awful lot more of that, of course, than there used to be. And it's something that is now a harmonised approach across the research councils. So the intention is that all of the councils will be supporting their knowledge exchange activities in this way. It doesn't mean that the responsive routes we used to have for people to apply for small grants to do follow-on activities and so on, we are bringing to an end, which does of course raise the issue I mentioned earlier that those institutions that don't get an impact acceleration account may feel that's obviously disadvantageous to them, although of course there is still the pathways to impact route within the research grant process. And finally, just to remind you about our DTCs, as you saw in the earlier pie chart, doctoral training still accounts for about a quarter of ESRC's budget. The funds that we make available directly at the moment support about 600 studentships a year, but of course we've said to the DTCs there's an expectation you will generate an additional 20% on top of that through partnership funding, in a sense what used to be the old case studentship model. And we reckon in the current year that's given rise to, not current, last year actually, we don't have figures yet for the year just started. That's probably enabled our grants to support over 750 studentships. I'm sure some of you will be aware of or have been involved in the conferences we've held for our students. Very well received by the participants. I think they found that a really valuable networking opportunity to meet with people working in sort of similar related areas across institutions. And of course we do focus some of our studentship support on priority areas where we feel there's a skills shortage, obviously quantitative methods, and I ought to also mention the Q-STEP initiative we launched with the Nuffield Foundation at HEFCE, which is to help bridge that gap between undergraduate and postgraduate level in terms of support for quantitative skills, and hopefully equip people better to do postgraduate work in the social sciences, and to actually provide some incentive for people to follow that route. And the response to that initiative was extremely positive. I think I'll leave it there, because conscious of the questions to ask, and there are many things I've missed out that I could have touched on.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great. Yep.
My question is in relation to the impact acceleration grants and the fact that it has been located in so few universities. Following on from the conversation earlier today when we talked about grant 2020 and the increased likely allocation of weighting to impact, I'm stating the obvious to say that it severely disadvantages those universities that are not holding the impact acceleration grants. And without it turning into something as a winch fest, this is the second example this afternoon of something from ESRC that Northern Ireland is excluded from, but also the post fellowships. So I don't know what it is that we're supposed to do to try to level the playing field, but it is one of the consequences of devolution that it becomes an ever-increasing circle. If we can't apply for the funding, the impact is going to become less, and so on, and will be completely priced out of the market.
No, and it's a fair point. I did have a quick word with Abby about the posting. I mean, I think we need to look at the way around that, because that's an unfortunate side effect of a particular rule. I mean, I think the issue about the IAAs, it's a fair point, of course. Wherever you draw the line, if you concentrate it in a particular number of institutions who get the majority of the ESRC funding, there will be losers. And we do have to do this in a joined-up way across all of the research councils. But I do also share your concern, as I mentioned earlier, that you perpetuate a particular problem because it's very hard to get into the game if you can't access the funding in the first place. And I think we ought to look at whether there's something more we can do in terms of being able to access funds for impact activities if you don't have an IAA. So I'm very happy to take that back to colleagues in the Research Council. I can't promise an instant answer, but I certainly hear what you're saying.
The doctoral training centres, you've got 21 of those. Is that now set in stone? You're not looking to increase the number of DTCs? There was given to some universities that might be possible to actually have a DTC.
Well, there will be a new round of commissioning for DTCs. We haven't fixed on the number that there will be. As you know, we encouraged collaboration. So of course, institutions that are, perhaps not amongst the strongest players in terms of PhD numbers or most research intensive can still join in a wider consortium. And in some cases, Scotland's the most obvious example. That has happened. I mean, we haven't fixed the parameters of the next sort of DTC sort of commissioning exercise. So in terms of the numbers, either of centres or of institutions covered within that, because the 21 DTCs covers, I think, 45 universities. I think we're very conscious of the problem that has just been touched on of institutional concentration perpetuating the status quo, making it increasingly difficult to access either QR through the next ref or Research Council funding or other sources if you are excluded. So there's no prior decision at the moment about whether that number will go up or down.
I was wondering, the PSA was very active lobbying in the European Union around the perceived disadvantage that humanities and social sciences are at in relation to Horizon 2020. And a reorganisation within the Commission would seem to take away the specialist grouping and all about those issues. So I just want to put it in context. Do you feel that, as far as political science is concerned, the battle has been won? And it's still an encouraging game for political scientists to get involved in Horizon 2020?
I think technically is, the message that is going out certainly is that actually it's supposed to be favourable to social sciences now. I think it will force us to think creatively as well about how we fit our research into some of the boxes that have been provided. So I think the danger is that actually we are, in order to secure funding and some of the alternative funding mechanisms that I mentioned, like the EDGs and the European Parliament, etc., they're very much responsive. So in the search to secure additional research income as it becomes increasingly scarce, we're actually limiting the scope of our research, and I think that is a serious concern. But equally, I think there are opportunities that are available to us there.
Yeah, money is a lot. That's a lot of that.
Yes.
From what I know, so just on that point, I think it's true that the community, British Academy, ourselves, other bodies have pushed quite hard to broaden the range of themes and to make them more inclusive. Because I think certainly on the first draft, it would have been far more difficult for us to. So I think it's a success story in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, Matt Beach, University of Hull, kind of building upon Kathy's point and then my colleague from UEA, connected to the DTCs and to the other larger funding opportunities. It does strike me that maybe decisions that were made within the last 10 years ago in terms of individual department relationships with the council is having an impact on a generation of younger and mid-career scholars who find themselves hard-working and active, but in institutions that don't have access to really ESRC funding in the form of doctoral students and what have you. And I just want to know really kind of what the council's doing about it, because you come in, I think you make some tremendously reasonable points when you present the council's face very well, very clearly, but it strikes a lot of us that you're speaking to pretty much a third of colleagues. And I know this is tough because we're in an era of austerity, but it would be remiss of me, not representing not just my colleagues, but colleagues in a similar sort of situation, to say, what are your plans about that?
Fair point. In terms of research funding, there is no restriction, other than the fact that success rates in many of our schemes are maybe only about 15%, and therefore only a minority will be successful. There's no institutional limit. In terms of other funding, like doctoral training, the reality is that the distribution of funding by institution is not that different now to how it was 10 years ago. The difference, of course, is that there was still the possibility of getting an ESRC studentship 10 years ago, even if you weren't at one of the most research-intensive institutions, and that's now gone unless you're part of a DTC collaboration. Be careful what I say. I mean, I think to some extent we were pushed in this direction a little by sort of government over recent years in terms of concentration, but also I think partly in the name of what was seen as sort of more efficient administration, you know, not running large-scale schemes that only a few people could win. But it is the potential consequences, as you say, of perhaps decisions made in the past, the sort of knock-on that we need to be sort of very conscious of. And I think it's been very well surfaced here, both in terms of impact and doctoral training. We do have, I mean, if the opportunity arises, we do actually have a meeting of our council next week. And it's certainly something I would, you know, raise with colleagues in the office and potentially at the council meeting. And then we actually have an annual sort of more strategic discussion at council early in the new year. I think we have to put this on the table because there is a danger that we'll end up with, you know, maybe no more than 10 institutions getting, you know, pretty much all of our money.
Today is the feast of St. Nicholas, who was made a saint for giving unexpected dosh to so possibly it's your lucky day.
Well,
what I would say is that the point that I made at the beginning, which is why networks are so important, and bringing in co-eyes, you know, alongside PIs in institutions that do have a track record. I would also add that, particularly if you're applying for European funding within the UK, having regional diversity is a strength of your bid. So it doesn't resolve the problem, but it is also a way to actually encourage colleagues to really build those kind of networks with other institutions and maintain them on a regular basis.
Yeah, very good. And don't forget, if you are applying, you can always bring in collaborative institutions in Kazakhstan, such as my own. Right, I think that really rounds us up, because I know that people are anxious and cheap day returns have been important. Of course, which the ESRC would congratulate people on spending some of their money. So, thank you to our speakers. It was very very useful session. I have just one more thing for you to do, because I see Louise's eyes are burning at me at the moment. I have to mention that the feedback forms, yes, they're in your packet, the feedback forms. Please fill them in and leave them on the table outside.
Yeah, very much.
Or in it, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I appreciate it. You've got the opportunity.
it's the issue that the saving grace is the elementary with access.
I really mean it.